He took his dog, a 1-year-old Australian shepherd named Freckles, dropped off at a Yellowstone Trailhead on April 6, 1991 with a backpack and a plan. Neither of them have ever been found. Not a boot, not a collar, not a single hair. Dan Campbell was 42 years old. He lived in Big Timber, Montana. He was described by his family and friends as a man who knew the wilderness, comfortable in it, experienced enough to take it seriously. By the spring of 1991, Dan was struggling financially. He had found what he thought was a solution: shed elk antlers, which have the market value and which could be collected on foot through Yellowstone's backcountry. Collecting antler sheds inside Yellowstone National Park is illegal. Dan knew that. He went anyway. On April 4, 1991, a female acquaintance drove Dan to the Hellroaring Trailhead on the northern edge of Yellowstone. He had his backpack. He had Freckles, his 1-year-old Australian Shepherd Heeler mix. The plan was a 4-day trek from Hellroaring to the town of Jardine, Montana, outside the park boundary. His girlfriend, Tracy Erb, was scheduled to pick him up in Jardine on April 8th. He did not arrive on April 8th. Tracy reported him missing. Search and rescue deployed to the Hellroaring Corridor, one of the most technically demanding sections of Yellowstone backcountry. A steep 600-foot descent over switchbacks to a suspension bridge spanning the Yellowstone River, then an expansive sagebrush plateau before dropping to Hellroaring Creek. The search found nothing. Not Dan, not his gear, not Freckles. Here is the detail that separates this case from a standard wilderness disappearance. Dogs leave traces. Trained wilderness search teams, which the Yellowstone search included, are specifically equipped to find evidence of animals as well as people. A dog moving through backcountry terrain leaves scent, hair, prints, biological material. An Australian Shepherd Heeler mix, an athletic, alert working breed, does not simply vanish in wilderness without leaving the kind of evidence that experienced search teams would find. Neither Dan's tracks nor Freckles' tracks were located beyond the initial trailhead area in the documented search records. The investigation expanded over time. The NPS, U.S. Forest Service, FBI, and Park and Sweetgrass counties all investigated. Dan's brothers in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, told the Helena Independent Record that Dan had been running with some pretty shady characters and that foul play was possible. In 2016, 25 years after Dan disappeared, the NPS FOIA records for this case note new potential evidence surfacing. That notation is redacted. What the evidence was and what it indicated is not available in any public document currently accessible. Dan Campbell's family has never had an answer. His brothers continued to push for investigation for years. Freckles was 1-year-old. Neither of them left a trace in the terrain that took them both. A man and his dog. A search that found nothing. Not one biological trace of either of them in terrain specifically searched for both. And new evidence in 2016. Redacted. Subscribe to Obscure Nights right now. And I want to know what you think happened on that trail. Accident in the storm? Foul play from the shady characters his brothers mentioned? Or something about that terrain that explains why 2 living creatures left absolutely nothing behind? Drop your answer below. Stuart Isaac was 48 years old. He was from Burtonsville, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. He was born in the Pacific Island nation of Palau. By all accounts from everyone who knew him, he was not an experienced hiker or outdoorsman. On September 6, 2010, he left his home in Burtonsville. He wrote a note for his family saying he was going on a cross-country trip. No return date mentioned. He left in his black 2009 Lexus IS 25. He drove approximately 32 hours to Yellowstone National Park. On September 24, 2010, somewhere on the road between Maryland and Wyoming, Stuart called Matsui Evans, a friend from high school who was living in Guam. He called her at approximately 3:30 in the morning, her local time in Guam, which placed the call at the correct time for someone driving through the Midwest toward Wyoming. They spoke for 2 hours. Matsui told investigators later that she found the call odd because they rarely spoke on the phone. Their communication was typically text messages and email. They had different time zones. Phone calls were not their pattern. She said, "Now I know that he's missing. Why would he call me 2 days before something happened?" 2 days later, September 26th, Stuart's Lexus was discovered by a park ranger during a routine night patrol of the Isa Lake parking area at Craig Pass. Craig Pass sits at 8,262 feet on the Continental Divide on the Grand Loop Road between Old Faithful and West Thumb. The car was unlocked. The keys were still inside. There were no hiking trails in the immediate vicinity of Craig Pass. No established routes. No logical reason for an inexperienced hiker with no gear to stop at that specific location. Repeated air and ground searches found nothing. No sign of Stuart Isaac, no remains. No equipment, though no camping equipment had been found in the vehicle either, suggesting he had left home in September with no gear for the wilderness he apparently entered. The circumstances that the official investigation documented and could not resolve. Stuart Isaac drove 32 hours specifically to Yellowstone. He parked at a location with no trails. He left his car unlocked with his keys inside, either in sudden urgency or deliberately, and walked into terrain he had no experience navigating. 2 days earlier, he had made a 2-hour phone call at 3 a.m. to someone he normally only texted. His family received no explanation in the note he left. His bank accounts, monitored in the years following his disappearance, showed no activity suggesting he left of his own accord and built a new life. Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland maintains an open case alongside the NPS investigation. Stuart Isaac was last seen by his family on September 12, 2010, the last confirmed sighting before Craig Pass. What happened in the 14 days between those two dates is not documented in any public record associated with this case. The phone call at 3 a.m. to someone he rarely called. A 2-hour conversation 2 days before he disappeared into a park without trails, without gear, without explanation. Whatever Stuart Isaac was trying to say that night, or whatever he needed someone to hear, he said it to a friend in Guam at 3:30 in the morning, and then he drove to Yellowstone and did not come back. 11 years after Stuart's Lexus was found at Craig Pass, 2 experienced National Park Service veterans went into Yellowstone's most remote backcountry for a 4-night canoe trip. Only one of them came back to the shore. The other has never been found. That is the third case tonight. Kim Crumbo and Mark O'Neill were both National Park Service retirees. Both had spent decades on the water. River guides, park rangers, backcountry veterans. They were brothers. Kim was 74 years old. He was a former U.S. Navy SEAL who had served 2 deployments in Vietnam, been awarded the Bronze Star with V device. He had spent 20 years as a river ranger and wilderness coordinator in Grand Canyon National Park. He was described by colleagues as a monumental hero and legend of a man. Mark was 67 years old. His sister described him as all things water. A surfer, lifeguard, skipper, former river ranger. A man who had been a waterman his entire adult life. On September 12, 2021, they set out from the south shore of Shoshone Lake, Yellowstone's second-largest lake at 8,050 acres, on a 4-night canoe trip. Shoshone Lake is accessible only by foot or water. No roads reach it. Its average year-round temperature is approximately 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time for an unprotected person in that water is estimated at 20 to 30 minutes. They did not have dry suits or cold water protective gear. Neither did most canoe paddlers on Shoshone. Two veterans of backcountry water travel, going into terrain they both knew, without the specific equipment that water at that temperature requires. A family member reported them overdue on September 19th. Park crews located their campsite on the south side of the lake. Well tended, intact, as if left by people who expected to return to it. Their canoe, paddle, personal flotation device, and other personal belongings were found on the east shore of the lake. The next morning, September 20th, rangers found Mark O'Neill's body face down in a small cliff-ringed cove on the east shore. One arm was draped through the armhole of an unzipped life vest. He had died of hypothermia. Kim Crumbo was not with him. The search that followed deployed helicopters, boat teams, sonar equipment from the NPS Submerged Resources Center, dog teams from western Montana search dogs, and ground crews on trails so remote that most of the shoreline has no path at all. The search transitioned from rescue to recovery on September 24th. Kim Crumbo has never been found. The detail that experienced backcountry investigators who have reviewed this case describe as the most difficult to resolve is this: two men, same canoe, same storm, 45-mile-per-hour winds building waves of 2 feet and more on a 6-mile open water fetch. Same cold lake. One body recovered on the east shore. One man not recovered anywhere. Mark O'Neill was found where physics and current and the geometry of the lake's shoreline suggested a person in the water would go. Kim Crumbo, a former Navy SEAL with documented water survival training, a man who had swum under capsized boats in the Grand Canyon, was not found where any current or drift analysis pointed. Kim's wife, Becky, said that people who knew him well had been calling and messaging her convinced that something sinister had happened. She did not believe that herself. She believed it was a fluke and an act of nature. But the sonar that mapped Shoshone Lake's floor during the search did not find him. The dogs did not find him. The ground crews who walked every accessible section of shoreline did not find him. Mark came to rest where the lake delivered him. Kim Crumbo went somewhere the lake has not delivered him from. Whatever happened after the canoe went over on Shoshone Lake on a night in September 2021. The lake kept one of them and gave back the other. It is not explained why. Same storm, same cold water. One body on the east shore, one Navy SEAL, a man trained to survive exactly this, never found. Not by sonar, not by dogs, not in any drift analysis. Subscribe to Obscure Nights right now. This channel covers the cases where the official record closes without closing. And tell me what you think. Does Kim Crumbo's training explain why his body went somewhere Mark's didn't? Or does the fact that not even sonar found him tell you something different happened to him? Drop it below. I read every comment. 3 cases, 3 sections of the same park, 3 different decades. The detail that connects Kim Crumbo and Mark O'Neill's case to every cold water wilderness death documented in the NPS records is something most backcountry paddlers have never been taught. It is called the 1-10-1 rule of cold water immersion. The first one is 1 minute. In the first 60 seconds after entering cold water, anything below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, your body undergoes cold shock. Gasping reflex, hyperventilation, panic breathing. This is when most drowning deaths happen, not from hypothermia, from inhaling water during the gasp reflex. You cannot control it. You can only prepare for it by knowing it is coming. The 10 is 10 minutes. After the initial shock, you have approximately 10 minutes of meaningful movement in cold water before your arms and legs lose the muscle control needed to swim. 10 minutes to get to a shore, a boat, any solid surface. After 10 minutes, you are largely dependent on your PFD to keep your airway above water. The final one is 1 hour. It typically takes approximately 1 hour in cold water before hypothermia renders you unconscious. 1 hour of time. If you have a PFD, if you stayed calm in the first 60 seconds, if you conserved movement after the first 10 minutes. Shoshone Lake averages 48 degrees Fahrenheit. At 48 degrees, the numbers compress significantly. Cold shock is more severe. Functional movement time shortens. If you are paddling any cold water backcountry lake, regardless of your experience level, wear your PFD fastened at all times on open water, not clipped to the canoe, on your body, fastened. Mark O'Neill's arm was through the armhole of an unzipped vest when he was found. A fastened PFD in cold water is the difference between the first scenario and the second. 3 cases. 1 park. The questions the official record left open. This is obscure nights, where the cases nobody talks about get told the way they actually happened. Good night.